Hi, welcome back. So last time we were together we had a little look at Dionysus's journey into the underworld, and today we're going to focus more on what happens when he arrives. So remember, Dionysus is in disguise. He is dressed as Heracles in his lion skin, and he is really expecting a warm reception in the underworld. After all, that's why he visited his half-brother, for some good advice on how to get there, who to know, and how to move about in the underworld without any trouble. And when he reaches the underworld, he's already had this horrible argument with the frogs on his rowing trip on the way down, where we see he's not a proficient oarsman, he's not good on a boat, which for an Athenian doesn't really bode well, to be honest. He actually said on his way down, "I'm no Salaminian," so linking back to the Battle of Salamis, so looking at really key naval battles that'd be quite, timely and relevant to an Athenian audience, but for us are a bit trickier to unpick. And when Dionysus arrives in the underworld, this is where we get the less famous but actually more involved chorus of Initiants coming forward. So first of all, Dionysus arrives in the underworld and he's reunited with Xanthias, as I mentioned last time. Xanthias wasn't allowed on the ferry because he's a slave, and because he didn't fight at Argonautai, he doesn't have citizen status. So again, we're getting these constant links back to the wartime state of Athens during the Peloponnesian War. And these references are really tricky for us to get, but as I've said in a previous video when we were looking at Bottom and thinking about the main character in Bottom's link to the Falklands conflict.
That?
Well, it's an appendix scar.
Yes, an appendix scar. And how do you think I got that?
Well, from an operation to remove your appendix.
Yes. Yes, that's where an Argy took my appendix out with his bayonet.
I don't believe a word of this. In fact, I don't believe it so much, I'm going to smash your face in.
These are things that people at the time are living and breathing, and they're really relevant and instinctive jokes that are really getting an easy laugh and a timely laugh. Frogs is really a comment on its day, and that's something that we looked at in the first video together, and I've linked them all below if you want to catch us back up through the series. So Dionysus arrives, he's a crap seafarer, he's not a great Athenian by extension of that, he says he couldn't have fought at Salamis. Xanthias couldn't have fought at Argonautai and didn't fight at Argonautai. And they're reunited as this kind of, incapable comedy act where each of them's commenting on what the other is doing. And it's this kind of power imbalance we see between the two that we're going to see going forward in the underworld as well. It's something that we looked at previously as a kind of duo or double act, much like, Del Boy and Rodney in Only Fools and Horses. So this kind of comedy still works for us today, even if some of the jokes are very, timely and based in history, things that we find more difficult to unpick. So when Dionysus arrives in the underworld, he arrives with quite a lot of bluster and bravado. He thinks that, dressed as Heracles, he's pretty much untouchable and there's absolutely nothing for him to worry about. And then Xanthias really starts to rattle his cage a little bit, where Xanthias is saying that something's coming and Dionysus thinks it's some sort of horrible shape-shifting monster like Ampusa. And what it turns out to be is the entrance of the Initiants. So the Initiants are actually meant to be worshippers of Dionysus. We should see really what we're expecting as an audience is a lot of reverence, a lot of power on Dionysus's part. And if you think to tragic examples like Euripides' Bacchae, which I've mentioned in another series, Dionysus's interaction with his followers, with the Bacchic women in Euripides' Bacchae, is really sinister. They follow him around, he is the master of puppets, he tells them what to do, and so your expectation when we see Dionysus Initiants coming in is really the same. But of course this is comedy, so any expectations you have are going to be completely twisted. So the Initiants come in and they really set their stall out with what kind of group they are. The first thing that they start to claim is a certain kind of people that can join them. So what kind of values you should have, what kind of morals. And because this is comedy, that degenerates into some sort of political slurs and political commentary that can be quite tricky to unpick. It's really centred on critiquing taxes and the taxation system. So although we have, ostensibly on the face of things, a group of Initiants who are praising Dionysus, what we actually have is a little bit of background contemporary comedy coming in. They're making jokes that are asides to the story to keep the pace of the humour really going. Sometimes in sitcom, if we think about, sitcoms that we watch, it can take a while for there to be a comic payoff in a story, so it's good to have somebody providing these kinds of asides and these off-the-cuff jokes and things that are quite timely to keep the audience warm and stop them getting, you know, disengaged and bored. And that's what the Initiants really offer to frogs. They make particular jokes on, say, key figures like Therichion and Archidemus, and these are really hard for us to pin down. Sometimes when we get these names and these references, we don't actually know who they were. We can't always recover it. The suggestion seems to be that Archidemus was one of the people who prosecuted a commander who had fought at Dionysus. So again, drawing in people who've been part of post-war scandals and conflicts might be really important. There seems to be a really keen eye on the aftermath of the Battle of Dionysus and the Peloponnesian War at large. So the Initiants can be quite difficult for us to unpick. They're the first point of contact for Dionysus and Xanthias when they enter the underworld, and they're not really what we're expecting. So whereas we're expecting people who are going to praise Dionysus, like the Bacchae and Bacchantes, what we actually get is a group of people who work as a kind of stand-up and provide this comic commentary all the way through. And this carries through a little bit more into the Parabasis with frogs. So the Parabasis is when a chorus comes forward, and in comedy this really means that they are going to provide essentially a break and some stand-up in the middle of the plot. So whereas I said it's quite hard to keep an audience warm in comedy, if you've not got somebody making asides, this provides a break for the chorus to come forward, break the fourth wall, which we're getting more used to in comedy, and really just slam on events of the time. So in the Parabasis of frogs, the Initiants come forward and they make comments about an assassinated statesman like Phrynicus. They critique the freeing of slaves at Dionysus by referencing the citizen status that was given to refugees from Plataea following a conflict in Sparta. So they're really talking about who's who in Athenian society, how should politics be running. Imagine right now if somebody came forward and did a whole Parabasis on Brexit. It would be really timely and really relevant. There are jokes that we would get, there are key players that we would expect to be in the mix, and yet for somebody, you know, 1,000 years from now, they would be having to look all of that up. And that's just the position that we're in with frogs and with the Parabasis. We also have trouble with the text sometimes because, as I said before, we don't know who all these key figures were, and sometimes we can't be sure we've got the names exactly right based on the version of the text that comes down. So we might have another joke about Cleisthenes in here, the shield dropper that I mentioned in a previous video. We might have another joke about Cleisthenes. To be totally honest, the best thing you can do if you're studying frogs is not try to memorise each individual joke and each individual key person. That's, you know, a really time-intensive thing to do that doesn't always translate across into marks in exams. I think the best thing to do is try and understand the gist of the humour, what are they getting at, and remember perhaps a couple of key figures like Cleisthenes or a key event like Dionysus, because you're going to get so much more mileage out of that. And it's going to really enhance your knowledge of the play rather than bogging you down in the details. So I hope that was a helpful introduction to the Initiants and gave you a bit of an idea of what role they play in the comedy. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to videos to keep the channel going, and as ever, do take a look at the website I've just popped up where all of the different projects I work on are in one place. Thanks.